My golden brother ran the family company into the ground, yet my parents still pushed me to hand him half of my business after years of mocking it as useless. I just grinned and replied, I don't bring thieves on my team. For 7 years, my brother called my business useless. Then one Tuesday afternoon, he showed up in my lobby and asked for half of it. He was standing in my reception area, flanked by our parents, holding a manila folder and staring at the logo on my wall, the same logo he'd laughed at 7 years ago. He wasn't laughing now. My name is Graham Sutton, and this is the story of how my brother destroyed everything our father built, how my parents tried to make that my problem, and how one sentence in a conference room ended 30 years of being the wrong son. Let me start with the company, because the company is where everything begins and everything ends in the Sutton family. Sutton and Sons General Contracting. My father, Harold Sutton, started it in 1987 with a pickup truck, a toolbox, and a handshake agreement with a local developer who needed someone reliable to frame houses. 30 years later, it was one of the most respected mid-size contracting firms in the region. 42 employees, government contracts, commercial builds, a reputation that Harold had constructed the same way he constructed buildings, carefully, honestly, one relationship at a time. In our town, the Sutton name meant something. It meant the job would get done, it would get done right, and you wouldn't find shortcuts in the foundation. Harold Sutton built that with his hands and his word, and he always intended to pass it to his sons. Both of them. That was the plan on paper. In practice, the plan had one son, and I wasn't him. Trenton is 3 years older than me. He's the kind of person who enters a room and the room rearranges itself around him, not because he deserves it, but because his energy demands it. Loud, confident, physically imposing, the handshake and a grin type, who makes you feel like the most important person alive for the exact duration it's useful to him. Dad saw Trenton and saw himself, or the version of himself he wished he'd been. More charismatic, more commanding, more suited to the boardroom than the job site. Dad started grooming Trenton from high school, brought him to client meetings, introduced him as my son, the future of the company, gave him a corner office at 23 before he'd managed a single project from start to finish. I was the other one, the one in the background, the one who actually read the contracts, who double-checked the material orders, who spent summers on job sites learning how concrete cures and why load-bearing walls don't move just because the client wants more open space. I love the work, not the business side, the craft, the engineering of it, the problem-solving. I'd come home covered in dust with ideas about improving workflow, about sustainable materials, about modular construction techniques I'd been reading about. I'd bring these ideas to Dad at dinner, and he'd listen the way you listen to a radio station you didn't choose, patiently, politely, already mentally tuned to something else. That's interesting, Graham, he'd say. Then he'd turn to Trenton and ask about the Henderson account. When I was 25, I told Dad I wanted to start my own firm. Not competing, complementary. Specialized sustainable construction. Green building. Energy-efficient design build. It was a growing market. I'd done the research, and I believed in it the way you believe in something when you've studied it long enough to see the future in it. Dad's reaction was a masterclass in quiet devastation. He didn't yell. Harold Sutton doesn't yell. He does something worse. He goes still. He looked at me across the kitchen table with an expression that I can only describe as disappointed recognition, like he'd always suspected I'd leave and was now confirming his suspicion. You're walking away from the family, he said. Not the business. The family. As if they were the same thing. As if choosing my own path was choosing against him personally. I'm not walking away from anything, Dad. I'm building something. You're building a competitor. Sustainable construction isn't general contracting. There's almost no overlap. There's overlap in loyalty, Graham. And right now, yours is missing. Mom, Deborah, was at the counter. She didn't say anything during the conversation, which was how Deborah operated. Silence during the conflict, editorial commentary after. That night, she called me and said, "You're breaking your father's heart. You know Trenton needs you there. The company needs both of you." What she meant was, Trenton needs you there because Trenton can't do it alone, and we all know that, but we're never going to say it out loud. I left anyway. No family money. No support. No referrals from Dad's network. When I told Trenton, he laughed. Not a mean laugh. Exactly, but the kind that's worse because it's genuine. He genuinely thought it was funny. Sustainable construction? What? You're going to build houses out of feelings and recycled dreams. He clapped me on the shoulder. Good luck, little brother. Come back when the real world humbles you. That was 7 years ago. The real world didn't humble me. It educated me. There's a difference. Year 1 was brutal. Claire and I, we were newly married then, 26 years old, operating out of our living room with a laptop and a phone plan we could barely afford. Came within 2 months of closing before we hadn't even opened. Our first loan application was denied. Our second was denied. Our third was approved for half of what we'd asked. Claire was working full-time as a dental office manager, while I spent every other waking hour cold calling developers, architects, builders, anyone who might need someone who understood green building and was willing to work for cost just to build a portfolio. Our first project was a small commercial renovation, a dental office, actually, that Claire's boss needed retrofitted for energy efficiency. $12,000. I did most of the work myself. It came in on time and under budget, and the energy savings in the first year paid for the retrofit twice over. The client told a friend. The friend told a developer. The developer gave me a shot on a mid-size residential project. And slowly, like a river cutting through rock, not fast, not dramatic, just persistent and inevitable, the business grew. Year 2, 4 employees. Year 3, 11. Year 4, our first government contract, a municipal building retrofit that was 3 times bigger than anything we'd done. Year 5, we moved into a real office. Year 6, I hired a CFO because I couldn't manage the books alone anymore. Year 7, 38 employees, 14 million in annual revenue, and a reputation in sustainable construction that was, if I'm being honest, starting to rival what Dad had built in general contracting. Nobody in my family acknowledged any of it. Not one word. Not one visit to the office. Not one question at Thanksgiving about how things were going. What I got instead was Trenton's commentary, delivered with the consistency of a man who'd never let a family gathering pass without reminding me of my place. How's the tree hugger business? Every Christmas. Building anything real yet? Or still playing with cardboard? Every barbecue. Dad's company did 40 million last year. But hey, your little green thing is cute. Every birthday. He said these things in front of our parents. Dad would chuckle, a half laugh, the kind that says, I'm not endorsing this, but I'm not stopping it. Mom would change the subject, which was its own form of endorsement, silence as permission. I stopped attending family events for a while. Claire noticed the change before I did. You come home from their house like someone drained the battery out of you, she said once. You're a different person for 3 days after. It's not worth it. She was right. But cutting off family, even a family that treats you like a footnote, is harder than it sounds. The guilt isn't rational. It's architectural. It's built into the foundation. Now let me tell you what Trenton did with the company Dad spent 30 years building. Harold retired 2 years after I left. Handed Trenton the keys at a dinner party. Literally, a set of keys to the office, presented in a velvet box like a crown at a coronation. Speech and everything. I'm passing this company to my son, who I know will carry it forward with the same values and dedication that built it. There were tears. There was champagne. There was Trenton, standing at the head of the table, accepting a 30-year legacy with the confidence of a man who'd never once questioned whether he deserved it. He started modernizing immediately, which, in Trenton's vocabulary, meant spending money the company hadn't earned yet on things the company didn't need. First month, he gutted the office. Tore out the functional, modest workspace Dad had maintained for decades, the desks that worked, the chairs that held, the carpet that was ugly but honest, and replaced it with an open-plan showroom. Glass walls, designer furniture, a conference room with a built-in espresso machine and a sound system for client experiences. He hired an interior designer, not from the industry, from the lifestyle magazine circuit. The bill came in at $180,000. Revenue impact, 0. Client impact, 0. But it photographed well for the new website Trenton had commissioned for another $40,000. And looking impressive was always more important to Trenton than being impressive. First quarter, he fired 6 employees. Not the underperformers, the veterans. The project managers who'd been with Dad for 15, 20 years. Men and women who knew every client by name, every building code by heart, every supplier's delivery schedule, every municipal inspector's temperament. He replaced them with friends. Fraternity brothers. Guys who called him T and wore loafers on job sites and took 2-hour lunches at restaurants that Dad would have considered an indulgence. They didn't know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition, but they knew how to sit in a conference room and agree with Trenton, which was the only skill the new Sutton and Sons actually required. First year, he lost 2 major clients. The Henderson account, 22 years old, Dad's first commercial client. The relationship that had built the foundation of the company. Left after Trenton showed up to a project review 40 minutes late, visibly hungover, and told the client's project manager to relax. It's just a building. Just a building. To a man who trusted the Sutton name with a $12 million development. That quote made it around the industry in a week. I heard it from 3 different contractors, 2 of whom called me specifically to say, "What happened to your father's company?" Second year, the bleeding accelerated. Key employees, the ones Trenton hadn't fired, started quitting. Not with drama. With resignation letters and 2-week notices, and the exhausted professionalism of people who tried to hold the line and finally accepted it was gone. The head of estimating left. The lead superintendent left. The safety coordinator left. Each departure took institutional knowledge with it. Decades of expertise walking out the door because the man at the top had replaced competence with confidence and hoped nobody would notice the difference. Third year, the debt became structural. Not the manageable kind that businesses carry, the kind that compromises the foundation. Trenton had taken on projects the company couldn't deliver. Commercial builds requiring expertise his fraternity brothers didn't have. Government contracts with penalty clauses that activated like landmines when deadlines were missed, and deadlines were always missed, because missing deadlines is what happens when your project manager's primary qualification is having shared a dorm with the CEO. Every missed deadline cost money. Every cost overrun ate margin. Every angry client told 2 other clients. And the referral network Dad spent 3 decades weaving unraveled in 18 months like a sweater caught on a nail. Fourth year, Sutton and Sons was functionally dead. No active projects. $4.2 million in accumulated debt. Pending lawsuits from 2 contractors who'd never been paid and a client who'd put a deposit on a building that was still, 9 months later, a concrete slab. The 42 employees Dad had at retirement were down to 7, most of whom were updating their resumes on company time because there was no actual company work to do. And here's where the first knife goes in, the one that cuts deepest because it draws blood from my father. Trenton wasn't just mismanaging the company. He was stealing from it. I didn't know this until much later, until the Tuesday afternoon in my conference room when I laid out what I'd found. But in the months leading up to that meeting, an old contact of mine, a forensic accountant named Deborah Whitfield, hired by one of the contractors suing Sutton and Sons, shared some findings with me. Not officially, just a conversation over coffee that turned into a document review that turned into a picture so ugly I had to look at it 3 times before I believed it. Trenton had been funneling money out of the company for at least 2 years. Shell invoices, payments to companies that didn't exist, for services never rendered, that routed to accounts he controlled. A consulting firm that was just a bank account in his name. Equipment purchases that never arrived on any job site. Client deposits that were logged as revenue and then transferred to personal accounts before they hit the operating budget. Conservative estimate, $470,000. Possibly more. And here's the part that makes me sick. Dad's retirement was tied to the company. His pension, his equity stake. His entire financial future was embedded in Sutton and Sons the way rebar is embedded in concrete. Structurally, permanently, inextricably. When Trenton drained the company, he didn't just kill the business. He drained Dad's retirement. Harold Sutton, 67 years old, 30 years of work, a legacy built with his hands, was broke. Not struggling. Not tight. Broke. Because his golden son had stolen from the company that was supposed to be his father's safety net. And my mother knew. That's the twist I didn't see coming. The one that hit me later, after the meeting, after I'd replayed every conversation from the previous 2 years and noticed the things I'd missed. Deborah, my mother, had known the company was failing for at least 18 months. She'd seen the letters from creditors. She'd heard the phone calls. She'd watched Trenton's lifestyle remain suspiciously unchanged while the company hemorrhaged money. And instead of confronting him, instead of telling Dad, instead of calling me, she covered for him. Made excuses. Told Dad the down quarter was an industry-wide problem. Told relatives the company was restructuring. Told herself, I imagine, that it would turn around, that Trenton would figure it out, that the golden child's halo was just temporarily dimmed and would shine again if everyone just gave him a little more time. She enabled the destruction of her husband's legacy to protect the image of the son she'd chosen as her favorite. And when the building finally collapsed, when there was nothing left to cover, nothing left to spin, nothing left to protect, her solution wasn't accountability. It was me. Which brings us to Tuesday. I was in my office reviewing plans for a new project, a net zero energy school, the biggest contract we'd ever landed, when my assistant buzzed in. Your brother is in the lobby. And your parents? I hadn't seen any of them in 4 months. We'd had a tense Thanksgiving where Trenton made his usual jokes and I left early. And since then the communication had been the occasional text from Mom, surface level, weather report style messages that said nothing and meant less. I walked out to the lobby. There they were. Trenton in his loose suit. Dad in a flannel shirt and work boots. He'd never stopped dressing like a contractor, even in retirement, which used to be charming and now just looked sad. Mom in the nice coat she wore to church, clutching her purse like a shield. Can we talk? Dad said. I brought them to the conference room. The big one. The one with the glass walls that looked out onto the open floor, where 38 employees were working on projects that paid their mortgages and funded their kids' schools. I wanted Trenton to see it. I wanted him to sit in a room surrounded by evidence of what useless looks like when it grows up. We sat down. Trenton put the manila folder on the table, slid it toward me. I didn't touch it. We have a proposal, Dad started. His voice was careful, rehearsed. I could tell because my father doesn't do careful, he does direct. Someone had coached him. Mom kept glancing at him between sentences, the way actors check with the director mid-scene. They'd practiced this, driven here with a script. The company is going through a transition, Dad continued. Trenton has some ideas about restructuring, and we think a partnership between your firm and Sutton and Sons could be. The company is bankrupt, Dad. Silence. The kind that has texture. Sutton and Sons hasn't completed a project in 11 months. You have for lawsuits pending. Your bonding company dropped you. The Henderson account, the Morrison account, the city contracts, all gone. You have 7 employees left, 3 of whom are actively interviewing elsewhere. I know because 2 of them have applied here. Dad's face went from rehearsed to raw in about 3 seconds. How do you know all that? Because I pay attention. Because people in this industry talk. And because when your competitors fail, the information travels, especially when the company has your last name on it. Trenton leaned forward. Okay, so you know the situation. That's actually good. Because what we're proposing is a merger. Your firm absorbs Sutton and Sons, we consolidate operations, and I come on as co-CEO. $220 salary. Equity stake of 25% vesting over 2 years. I read the proposal on the way from the lobby. I'd opened the folder while walking. Engineer's habit. I read everything. It's a good pitch if you don't know anything about accounting. But I do. Trenton's jaw tightened. Graham, I'm offering to bring 30 years of the Sutton name to your firm. That has value. The Sutton name has debt. $4.2 million in liabilities, to be specific. And the name isn't worth what it was, Trenton. Not after Henderson left. Not after the lawsuits. Not after the bonding company dropped you. You're not bringing value. You're bringing wreckage and asking me to store it in my building. Dad's hands were on the table. His fingers were trembling, slightly, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it because I'd spent my whole life watching those hands, and they'd never trembled before. Those were the hands that framed houses and shook on deals and held me up when I was learning to ride a bike. Those hands were trembling because the truth was entering the room and it was too heavy for him to hold. There's something else, I said. I looked at Trenton, held his eyes. I know about the shell companies. The room temperature dropped. The consulting firm that doesn't exist. The equipment invoices for equipment that was never delivered. The client deposits that were redirected before they hit operating. A forensic accountant has been through your books, Trenton. Not mine, one hired by the contractors suing you. The preliminary estimate is $470,000. Funneled out of a company that Dad spent 30 years building. Funneled into accounts you control. Trenton's face went white. Not red, white. The color of a man who's been caught in something he genuinely believed he'd gotten away with. That's Those are operating expenses. Consulting fees for what? For companies that don't have offices, employees, or tax records. For consulting that produced no reports, no deliverables, no correspondence. For equipment that no job site foreman ever signed for. I opened my own folder, the one I'd brought to the meeting, the one I'd been compiling for 2 months. I have the invoices, Trenton. I have the routing numbers. I have a trail that a first-year accounting student could follow. I turned to Dad. Did you know about this? He shook his head. Slowly. His eyes were wet. Not crying. Worse than crying. The dry, stunned stillness of a man who's watching his legacy and his son disintegrate simultaneously and doesn't know which loss to process first. I turned to Mom. Did you? She didn't shake her head. She didn't deny it. She looked down at her purse, the one she'd been clutching since the lobby, and said nothing. And her silence was the loudest thing in the room. You knew, I said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the calm precision of a man who builds things for a living and can identify a structural failure by the sound it makes. I knew the company was struggling, she said, carefully, choosing each word the way you choose steps on a frozen lake. I didn't know about the specific. You knew enough to hide it from Dad. You knew enough to cover for Trenton for 18 months. You knew enough to show up at my office today with a proposal to make his problem my problem because that's what this family does. It protects Trenton and it uses Graham. Her face crumbled. Not dramatically, quietly. The way a wall cracks before it falls. Trenton was staring at the table. Dad was staring at Mom. Mom was staring at nothing. I want to be clear about something, I said. I'm not doing this. There's no merger. There's no partnership. There's no co-CEO position, and there's no 220 salary for a man who stole from his own father's company. I pushed the manila folder back across the table. I built this business from my living room. With no family money, no family support, and 7 years of being told it was useless by the man who's now asking me for half of it. I did this alone. I did it right. And I'm not going to let someone who did it wrong, who didn't just fail but stole, walk into my building and take what I earned. I looked at Trenton. He looked back. And for the first time in our lives, the dynamic between us was perfectly, unambiguously clear. I don't bring thieves on my team. He flinched. Physically flinched, like the words had weight and they'd landed on something soft. Mom made a sound. A small, involuntary inhale. Dad just sat there. His hands had stopped trembling. They were flat on the table now, perfectly still, the way a man's hands go still when he's processing something too large for movement. The meeting ended. Not with a door slam. Not with a speech. They stood up, collected the folder, and walked out of my conference room, past my employees, through my lobby, under my logo, and out the front door. I watched them from the glass wall. Trenton walked fast, the walk of a man who wants to be somewhere else. Mom walked behind Dad, who walked slowly, head slightly bowed, like a man carrying a weight he'd just discovered and couldn't put down. The months that followed rearranged everything. Trenton lawyered up. Not for the company, for himself. The forensic audit expanded. The final number came in at just over $520,000. The contractor's lawsuits proceeded. A criminal referral was made. I don't know where that stands as of today, and I've made the deliberate choice not to track it. Trenton's consequences are Trenton's to carry. I carried his weight long enough. Dad came to see me alone, about 3 weeks after the conference room meeting. He didn't call ahead. Just showed up on a Thursday afternoon, the way he used to show up at job sites, unannounced, in his work boots, ready to see what the truth looked like without anyone having time to dress it up. My assistant let him in, and I found him standing in the lobby, studying the project photos on the wall. Schools, municipal buildings, a community center that runs entirely on solar, a retrofit of a historic library that won a sustainability award last year. He was studying them the way a contractor studies another contractor's work, not with jealousy or surprise, but with the quiet, professional respect of a man who recognizes craftsmanship when he sees it. He was leaning close to one photo, the Net Zero Community Center in Brantford, a project that had taken us 18 months and every ounce of engineering creativity I had, and I could see his lips moving slightly. He was reading the specs plaque in the photo. Harold Sutton, even at 67, even heartbroken, even broke, was still a builder at his core. He couldn't look at a structure without assessing it. "You build all this?" he said when he noticed me standing behind him. "Everyone." He nodded. "Slow." heavy. Then he turned to face me, and his expression was something I'd never seen from my father in 34 years of being his son. It wasn't the dismissive patience of the kitchen table conversations. It wasn't the rehearsed composure of the conference room. It was open, undefended. The face of a man who's taken off every piece of armor and is standing in front of you asking to be seen as he actually is. Flawed. Wrong. Sorry. I owe you an apology, Graham. Not just for Tuesday. For 30 years of Tuesday. I didn't say anything. I let him talk. Because Harold Sutton choosing to speak honestly, without deflection, without changing the subject to Trenton, that was a moment I'd waited my entire life for, and I wasn't going to interrupt it. I chose Trenton because he was easy to believe in. He walked into rooms the way I wanted to walk into rooms. He shook hands the way I wished I could. He looked like success, and I confused looking like it with being it. And you were quiet. You were careful. You asked questions I didn't have answers to, and instead of seeing that as intelligence, I saw it as hesitation. Instead of seeing strength, I saw something I didn't understand. And I backed the wrong son. I backed him for 30 years. And it cost me everything. The company, my retirement, and 2 decades of relationship with a son who deserved better than what I gave him. His voice cracked on the word decades. Not dramatically, just a hairline fracture in the composure, the kind of crack that tells you the structure is under more load than it's showing. Your retirement, I said. How bad is it? He looked at the floor, then the wall, then, finally, at me. It's gone, Graham. All of it. The equity was in the company. The pension was funded through the company. Every dollar I put away for 30 years was tied to Sutton and Sons, and when it went down, he stopped. Swallowed. Your mother and I have the house. Social Security. That's it. We're 67 years old, and we're starting over. 67 years old. 30 years of building. Everything stolen by the son he'd crowned and celebrated and chosen over me at every single turn. The son who'd taken the keys in a velvet box and used them to unlock the vault and empty it. I didn't offer to fix it. Not in that moment. Because fixing it immediately would have been the old Graham. The peacekeeper, the absorber, the son who solves everyone else's problems and calls it love. That version of me built a company from nothing while being told it was nothing. He didn't need to show up here. The new Graham needed to be present. The one who helps because it's right, not because it's expected. He came back the following Thursday. Same boots. Same flannel. But something was different. He stood straighter. Like telling the truth had redistributed a weight he'd been carrying unevenly for years. I'd prepared something. Not a handout. Not charity or a bailout or the kind of rescue that confirms the old narrative of Graham fixing things. A consulting contract. Real work. Real responsibility. Dad knew construction at a molecular level. 40 years of knowledge no degree teaches. I offered him a part-time advisory role, reviewing structural plans, mentoring young engineers who could design a net-zero HVAC system but had never stood on a foundation pour, providing the institutional wisdom that only comes from decades of boots on the ground. Fair pay, real contribution, dignity instead of pity. He read every page, every clause. Then he looked up, and his eyes were wet, different from the conference room, different from the lobby. These were the tears of a man being offered something he didn't expect. Not money, not rescue, but professional respect from the son whose profession he'd dismissed for 30 years. You're offering me a job, he said. I'm offering you a seat at the table, Dad. One you should have been at 7 years ago. You should have been my first advisor. You should have been the person I called when I was reviewing my first plans. But you chose a different table. I'm offering you this one now. He signed it that day, shook my hand afterward. Firm, steady, the handshake he gives to people he respects. First time in 34 years my father shook my hand like an equal. Claire and I had him and Mom over for dinner the following Sunday. It was awkward, the way all honest beginnings are awkward. Mom was quiet. She's been quiet since the conference room, which is its own form of reckoning. She hasn't apologized directly for covering for Trenton. I don't think she knows how. The architecture of denial she'd built was load-bearing. Removing it means the whole self-image comes down, and she's not ready for that demolition yet. Maybe she will be. Maybe she won't. I've stopped building my emotional life around her timeline. Dad sat at my kitchen table and ate Claire's pot roast and talked about concrete curing times with the enthusiasm of a man who's been starving for his own language. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard since before the divorce of his company and his faith in his firstborn happened simultaneously. Trenton hasn't contacted me. Not once since the conference room. I hear through industry contacts that he's living in an apartment now, a one-bedroom off the highway, a long way from the four-bedroom colonial he'd bought with money that, I now understand, was never really his. The house is being sold to cover debts. The BMW is gone, repossessed, not sold, which tells you everything about how carefully he managed his personal finances. The fraternity brothers don't return his calls. It turns out that loyalty purchased with someone else's money expires the moment the money stops. The throne room he built inside Dad's company, the glass walls and the espresso machine and the designer furniture he spent $180,000 on, was auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. Some of those designer chairs sold for less than what Dad used to pay for the folding chairs he'd set up on job sites for crew lunch breaks. I don't take pleasure in any of it, but I notice it. The way you notice when a building that was never structurally sound finally comes down. You don't celebrate. You just observe and confirm what the engineering always told you. Last week, I was at my desk late. The office was empty. I was reviewing the plans for the Net Zero School, the one that's going to be the largest sustainable education building in the state. My logo was on the wall behind me. My employees' desks were dark but present, the screens sleeping, the coffee cups waiting for morning. The building was quiet the way a building is quiet when it's well built, not empty, just resting, holding its weight easily, doing what it was designed to do. I thought about Trenton, about the day he laughed at my logo, about every Christmas where he called my work a hobby, about the Tuesday he walked into my lobby with a manila folder and a loose suit and asked for half of everything I'd built while he was busy destroying what he'd been given. And I thought about what I said to him, the 6 words that ended 30 years of being the wrong son. I don't bring thieves on my team. I meant every syllable. And I'd say it again. Because some people inherit everything and build nothing. And some people inherit nothing and build everything. And the difference between those two outcomes isn't talent or luck or favoritism. It's what you do when nobody's watching. It's what you build when nobody believes in it. It's the quiet, stubborn, unglamorous work of showing up every single day and earning what the world isn't going to hand you. Trenton was handed a kingdom. I was handed a door. He burned the kingdom down. I walked through the door. And on the other side was everything. A company that works, a team that trusts me, a father who finally sees me, a wife who believed in me before anyone else did, and a building full of evidence that the quiet son, the careful son, the son who was told he was useless and walked away instead of arguing, that son was right all along. The logo is still on the wall, the one Trenton laughed at. It looks pretty good from where I'm sitting.